some people don't even realize this, is that Photoshop cannot accurately display multi-channel files. So as soon as you add in another channel, what you're looking at on screen is not an accurate representation of the file itself. And that's a huge problem because we're all visual people. As you're working, you need to be able to see what you're doing on screen, and that's simply not possible in Photoshop. And what we found, by the way, anecdotally, is that it can be quite different. So we're not talking.
Welcome to the Color Matters podcast presented by TruHu. In this podcast, we discuss all things related to color with a variety of industry experts. Jodie Steen, welcome to this episode of the Color Matters podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, this is fun. I think I should start off by mentioning that you are heading up Spectraflow's New York office, and I head up our West Coast office. So we are colleagues. That said, our area of expertise has some overlap, but also has some areas where we don't overlap. And specifically, you're a big expert in multicolor work, and that's going to be the focus of our conversation today. And I guess I'll also mention that as one who heads up our New York office, there's probably a bunch of New York sounds that might be joining us in the background, and that just gives us authenticity. That we're the real deal. All right. So my understanding is you're one of the leading color consultants in the New York City area with a variety of fashion, cosmetic customers and other high-end brands. How did you get into this line of work?
I started through photography. So I spent my early years in New York City on set working with photographers and took on more of a technical role. And through that, learned quite a bit about color management. And that's what stuck. So I had kind of a knack for helping with color and threw myself into that line of work.
Good. And what kind of work are you typically hired to do at Spectraflow East?
We do a variety of color related projects. So that could be anything from like our core traditional setting up studios for a color accurate environment. So that looks like setting up computers and RIPs and printers and maybe meeting standards like Grackle for our clients. And then we do a bunch of training to make sure that everyone in-house is all up to speed and can manage the system properly. And then we also work with fine art clients. So we help artists, fine artists and photographers with special projects and some of the multi-channel work that we're going to discuss today. We also help with packaging. So that could be setting up systems internally or helping on a project basis where we're taking files and optimizing them so that they'll print exactly as our clients envision.
Okay, super. So it's fair to say that monitor calibration is probably an important part of what you do, but the big focus is print, and our deep dive today will be in the print side. So I think we're ready to dive a little bit into multicolor, and maybe we'll start by asking you can you help define what is multicolor print versus your standard CMYK?
So I like to say in the simplest terms that multi-channel is really anything outside of your standard CMYK. So that could be something like a duotone or a tritone, let's say if we're creating a fine art book, or it could be something more complex where there's an additional spot color and that spot color is interacting with CMYK, or maybe multiple spot colors where those spot colors are overlapping to build color. So you can imagine that when there's CMYK elements and maybe several spots, that can be quite complex.
Yeah, so I think most people who are, we're going to get into doing multi-channel separations and all that entails. Most people who are familiar with doing separations they are maybe in Photoshop you're having an RGB image, and they just do a mode CMYK, and voila, you got a CMYK file. Uh, I'm guessing you're using different tools for doing your multi-channel separation. So, what tools do you use, and how does that work?
Yeah, so we're primarily using GMG's Open Color. That's part of a suite of tools that we use from GMG. So that can also include Color Server, the Color plugin, which is a tool that exists inside Photoshop. And that tool allows us to apply the separations that we're building in Open Color. And then we're also using Color Proof, which is the program that allows us to print so that we can see what those separations look like in print.
So, in a traditional, let's say, without color proof, for instance, and and the other GMG tools, if you wanted to do a 5, 6 color job and you wanted to generate a proof, would that be possible?
Right. So the short answer is no on that. What the traditional way of doing separations without these kinds of tools is really kind of blind. So it might be taking a part of the the file, masking it out, or selecting a color range and just adding in maybe a Pantone color. And that can be problematic. So if we think about why, the first reason, and some people don't even realize this, is that Photoshop cannot accurately display multi-channel files. So as soon as you add in another channel, what you're looking at on screen is not an accurate representation of the file itself. And that's a huge problem because we're all visual people. As you're working, you need to be able to see what you're doing on screen, and that's simply not possible in Photoshop. And what we found, by the way, anecdotally, is that it can be quite different. So we're not talking about small differences. It can be really massive differences in the way that the file prints. And then we have the question of printing it. So, of course, you could print a Pantone color very easily in any of your standard rips. And you could define a spot color, print that. That's, everybody does that. But what is not possible is printing an accurate representation of the blends. So when you're using that Pantone color as in separation rather than just a simple spot color, we have to take into account how does that color mix with the other colors? How does it blend? And that can only be done with a RIP that is capable of handling multi-channel files, such as color proof when using the output function for MXN files.
Okay, so just to kind of summarize a little bit, that we're doing this multi-channel process. So you might have a special green color, Pantone green, and it's not just simply a spot color that's on a it's on a station on press, but it's part of the build of your file, and how that green color interacts with the other ones. Basically, Photoshop's not able to portray that either on screen, or a traditional RIP couldn't show that interaction as well. So the
Correctly.
tools that you're using, Open Color, and then what's the name of the tool that allows you to view colors accurately on screen?
That's part of the color plugin. There's a preview function that allows you to see the file.
And that's another GMG product.
Yes, exactly. And I should mention the other issue with doing separations the traditional way is that we're not taking into account hue. So part of what we're doing with this new methodology for separations is we're always targeting back to the original visual intent. So if we think about a photograph, an image, it has a certain gray balance to it, right? And we need to account for the hue of all of the colors in the build to make sure that we're targeting back to the original visual. And kind of the easiest way to think about this, I think of a client that had swapped out yellow with a 109. And if you just do a straight swap of that, yes, you're going to get a
Pantone
Pantone,
109,
a
which is
brighter yellow than your standard process yellow.
okay.
And so when you do that, yes, you're going to get much brighter reproduction in your yellows. But now what happens to your green? All of a sudden, your green looks kind of sickly because it's not the right hue. So by using this technology, you can think of it as getting the optimal bright results where you want it, but also in the areas where you want it to be neutral and you want the other colors to be that perfect representation of green. It's still going to give you that.
And my understanding is the kind of the secret sauce that makes this all possible is that the GMG tools are kind of working with the spectral data as opposed to some other form that that maybe colorimetric LAB data that other color related tools use. And the working with the spectral data enables you to have this flexibility that wouldn't be possible elsewhere. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. So by using the spectral data, there's just a lot more math behind that. And if they're able to accurately predict how those spot colors will interact, how the CMYK will interact with the spot colors, and that's what it gives the more accurate separation and output.
All right. Are you able to like maybe walk us through an interesting case study so we can kind of
Yeah.
see how this is applied in the real world?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of a cosmetics client, and they came to us with a beautiful package, and it was a green tube was the central image, and they were already using 7 channels on this package, so fully maxed out on the stations on the press. And the issue was that the main central image of the tube was built out of CMYK. So you can imagine a bright green tube in CMYK doesn't look great. It wasn't giving them the results that they were hoping for. They did have already in this makeup another green Pantone that they were not using in the separation of the tube, which would make sense to bring that in because we already have one Pantone green that we can use to help build a brighter green. And then we also noticed that there was black 3C used in the text. And so this allowed us to kind of think creatively and say, what is the best way that we could separate this file? And we had the idea, well, if we're using black 3C, and that's mandatory in this file setup, do we really need process black? So we took process black out, and everywhere that we needed black in the build of shadows and the build of imagery, we decided to use black 3C instead.
Can
And
I ask, how does black 3C differ from your typical K on a printing press?
I couldn't give you the lab values, but it's slightly
warm.
yeah, there is a different hue. It's a slightly different hue.
So maybe they're looking for a slightly warmer black to their text for whatever reason to give it that feel, and so that's already part of the project. So you're like, all
Yeah,
right, well we can use a variation on that for the process.
exactly. And what that allowed us to do was to free up a station. And we said, okay, if we have a station, we really need to address the green bottle, right? The
This
central image.
particular press had a maximum, if I understand correctly, that they were using had a maximum of 7 stations. So if you wanted to add an 8th color, that simply wasn't possible. That's why you're doing some of this creative engineering here.
Absolutely. So we were able to find another green PMS color, a stronger green PMS color that they had actually used in other branding. So we knew that this was going to be a good fit. And what we were able to do was build the bottle totally out of the 2 greens and the black 3C. So now we have this beautiful, bright, green bottle that they were hoping for, green tube that they were hoping for. And it's perfectly harmonized because the other elements, the text elements in the package, were using one of the same greens. So now we're not having this difference of like a weak, kind of sickly looking CMYK against a nice green Pantone color that was text in the other area of the file. So this requires a lot of gymnastics because there's different elements of the file that are built differently. And that's where the color plugin comes in, because one of the beautiful things about that tool is that we can work selectively. We can work on layers. So we can take out the shadow, for example, and build the shadow exactly as we want it. We can take just the tube and build that tube out of the three colors, and apply small changes to the areas of the file to get exactly the representation that we're looking for.
To put it in kind of layman's terms, you can do a little lasso around whatever segment of the image you want to work with, and then apply your separations just to that area and use different strategy for different parts of the image.
Exactly. And so that's exciting in and of itself, that, the control that you're able to have. But really, what the client loved so much about this is to be able to have a process. So if we think about what is the traditional process that they've used in the past, it's working blind, and that's what everyone is doing, because it's kind of, well, let's apply this Pantone and cross our fingers and hope for the best on press, or we're too scared to use that Pantone because we don't know what it's going to look like. And so we're able to turn that on its head and say, okay, now we're able to use these Pantone colors in separation. We're able to see it on screen. We're able to proof it out and hand the client a proof and say, do you like it? And now they're able to have a traditional creative process, where they can look at that proof and say, well, we'd like a little more contrast here. We need a little more weight there. And then we're able to make those changes and give a second round, which is then ready for approval.
Yeah, so the process includes an on-screen preview, but probably even more critical is the proof, where because everyone gathers around and can mark that up. And I'm hoping you're going to say that once it got on press, there wasn't a bunch of jiggering required to match the proof.
Exactly. So then when it comes to the press side, I'm sure many presses are probably not receiving files like this. So we're careful to release it with an explanation and a recipe is what we call it. So we are giving to the press how we built it. Now, ideally, and this was the case in this particular project, we're having interaction with the press ahead of time and saying, what is your ink order? What is your screen angle for all of these colors? And we're able to build that into the project. And then we're able to hand back and say, we use this ink order, we use these screen angles, we used a certain white point that we measured from the SPS board. So we're able to build it.
SPS board is the paper,
the substrate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds, my takeaway from what you just said is that there really should be a high level of communication with the press to ensure this complicated project will succeed. So you don't want to just ship it over the transom and say, hey, all right, go print it out. You need to really be communicating closely with your press. So this might not be an option that's available for brands that don't really have a close level of communication with their press.
So it's an interesting question, and I would say it's one of the challenges that comes up, is how do we know what the press is going to do? There's, I would say, even like a fear of, can we really print this way? And so in an ideal world, it's wonderful when we have clear communication from the press and we're able to go back and forth and have all of that set up front. But the reality is we don't always have that. And there have been many cases where we've produced a, a file and had to send it off, and it's still so much better. So if we think, I'm thinking of a project where we're replacing gray areas that were built in CMYK with black and a Pantone gray. Well, there's nowhere for that to go. It's going to be gray, so, and that's already so much better
Yeah.
than what they had before. So there are
So
these,
if the densities in the traditional scenario, if the densities drift throughout a press run, all of a sudden what was gray might look yellow or blue or whatever like that. But if you're building it out of only gray colors, even if the densities drift through a press run, you still got a gray image.
yes, absolutely. And so we've gained more and more confidence over the last several years with this process. In the beginning, I think even we had this kind of, is this going to work if we don't have the communication? And what we've found in practice is that even when we don't have a lot of information up front, if we have the basic information of what type of press is this, what type of paper are we printing on, we can assume a standard ink order. If we know that the press is using the actual Pantone color that we're specifying, the results are still pretty amazing. So that's been maybe a surprise even, that the process really works even without so much communication. But of course, we always prefer to have it.
Yeah. So my conjecture a minute ago that a high level of communication with the press was a requirement. Maybe it's not quite there. It's more like a nice to have, and it probably depends upon the job. Example that you gave with gray is kind of just, that's such a more robust way to structure a job that would require less communication with the press perhaps than this one where this really
Yeah,
complicated green job.
absolutely. And what we really need is, are they close to Grackle? So we're specifying Grackle. Are they close to Grackle? Are they using the G7 process? And if the answer is yes, then we're getting good results. Of course, if they're off in left field and we're specifying Grackle and they're not Grackle, that's where we're going to have trouble.
Got it. So one of my standard questions, which I think you've already maybe responded to, is what are the greatest challenges you face in this, particularly in this multi-channel projects that you're involved with? And you've already identified that communication with the press, particularly on really complicated jobs, sounds like it's important and can be a point of challenge. And or I guess this is related to that. If they're off standards, let's say they're off Grackle, then that's going to create a bunch of challenges for you as well. You could always, presumably, you could put a target on the press and build a
Yes.
custom profile to account for that, but that adds another level of complication to the project.
We do that often, actually, especially in the fine art arena, where we have a press test built in. And that works beautifully. We love when we can have press data. We can even make like a small little chart that can fit in the space in between, and use that to build our profiles and
So
our
it's
separations.
Like a little mini target, like with
Yeah.
100 patches.
Yeah, tiny little one. Yeah, just like a little strip. So that's absolutely possible. And the other challenge.
That's kind of interesting to me. Just before we move past that, because I'm used to the notion that the more patches, the better when you're building a printer profile. And in this scenario, maybe it's some of the sophistication that's inherent to Open Color allows you to build a good profile with relatively few patches. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can do that with really a very small target. So it's great because we don't always have room. If you're using a press sheet, you want to put your images on there, not just a ton of charts. So it's very useful. And one challenge coming back to that came to mind, which this one's not really so much a technical challenge. The challenge is that it's almost a new category. It's a new way of working. So there's never been this option before. So to get people that are in the seat making these files, from designers and and production inside to understand that this is even possible, that there's a whole new way of doing this that works, that can give them everything that they want to be able to see it ahead of time, have a review process, get the results that they want on press in a painless way. That's actually been a challenge.
I have to say I can certainly relate with TruHu, because if you tell people, hey, we can get you a good monitor calibration with just your iPhone, they're like, what? I've never heard of that. I don't know about that. So sometimes there's some skepticism or just fear of the unknown that has to be overcome. So I could see that totally with your multi-channel world as well.
Have you ever wished that there was an easy-to-use and cost-effective way to calibrate your monitor to show color accurately? Now there is. It's TruHu, and all you need to make it work is a smartphone. Go to TruHu.app and try it for free. That's TruHu.app.
So, okay, well that's is there anything else that you'd like to share at this point,
I'll just put an end cap on the project story. So the green bottle, when we did finally release that, and one of the production people went on press for that, the results were, when we said, hey, how did it go? She said that was the easiest press check I ever went on. And there's nothing better to hear than that from your client.
Yes. Yeah, that is nice. Did they ever ask you to go on the press check just to, because it's so sophisticated and challenging?
Yeah, especially I would say in the art world, which is a great deal of fun. So yes, we've done several press checks this year. One on the East Coast, one in Italy, and we love when we have those projects, especially when they're kind of, these out of the box non-CMYK projects.
Yeah, and was your experience, if some of these press checks were the multi-channel, was it like, oh yeah, it's just easy peasy?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a great way to end the conversation, because everyone can get behind an easy press check.
Yeah, such a good feeling too after all that work to show up and it starts printing and you're like, yeah, and you're just making these tiny moves to make it exactly the way you want it.
Okay. Hey, one final question for you I always like to end with, which is, if you could wave your magic wand, what color-related tool would you like to see land on your lap?
So this one, I think I might get my wish, because what we've said we would love to have is the power that we have in Photoshop for the color plugin to be able to use that inside Illustrator. And that's just been announced that there is now a tool that's going to be a plugin for Illustrator, so that we're able to use all of those separations that we're creating in Open Color and apply them directly on an Illustrator file. So we're pretty excited about that. We haven't even tested it yet. So
nice. Presumably this is a new tool from GMG.
Yes, an extension of their suite of products.
Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, I'll be curious to see how that works for you.
Yeah, me too.
Well, yep. I thank you very much for your time today, Jodie. Really fascinating deep dive into the world of multi-channel color for print. And you really, as far as I can tell, you have some absolutely unique expertise in this area, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
All right. Great talking with you.
You too.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform. And if you have thoughts on a guest you'd like me to interview, let me know. Lastly, if you care about seeing colors accurately on screen and you own a smartphone, give TruHu a try at TruHu.app.